Throughout our history, many people have migrated to different areas for economic, political, and social reasons. During this time of climate crisis, we are witnessing people who are being displaced because of climate change. And how can our church respond to the needs of these people, subject to drought, catastrophe, floods, and other kinds of extreme weather events that cause them to leave their homelands? Our churches request and seek that we reach out to strangers, to love our neighbors as our own brothers and sisters. And so this video seeks to inform us on how we might respond to the growing crisis that results from climate change and how we can receive our brothers and sisters who are subject to these disasters.
C'è un'indole del rifiuto che ci accomuna, che induce a non guardare al prossimo come ad un fratello da accogliere, ma a lasciarlo fuori dal nostro personale orizzonte di vita, a trasformarlo piuttosto in un corrente, in un suddito da dominare. Di fronte a quest'indole del rifiuto, radicata in ultima analisi nell'egoismo e amplificata da demagogie populistiche, urge un cambio di atteggiamento per superare l'indifferenza e anteporre ai timori un generoso atteggiamento di accoglienza verso coloro che bussano alle nostre porte.
This is a story about people who stand to lose everything. People who may need to flee their native home and never come back. These people are refugees, but they're not running from war or an oppressive government. They're seeking asylum from climate change.
My project is called Warm Waters, and it's about people living in the front line of the climate change.
That's Vlad Sokin. His project aims to document the effects of climate change on nations bordering the Pacific Ocean. So far, Vlad has focused on some of the most affected, the island nations of Oceania.
I have seen villages completely destroyed by strong winds and huge storm surges. People have lost their lives and communities have been displaced from places where their families have lived for generations.
Tuvalu, the fourth smallest nation on Earth, is struggling to cope with the consequences of climate change. Located about halfway between Australia and Hawaii, Tuvalu's 9 low-lying islands cover just 26 square kilometers with a population of just under 11,000. Here, rising sea levels and increasingly violent storms have already decimated the Tuvaluans' way of life.
Due to the limited space, people use the airport runway to exercise, play games, and even sleep when it's too hot to stay in the house. Rising sea levels are shrinking this already tiny atoll, and during king tides, even the runway is subject to flooding. It is predicted by the climate change scientists that this country might become uninhabitable in the future.
Land loss isn't the only problem facing oceanic nations like Tuvalu. The rising sea levels are cutting off access to surface water. Right now, around 3 million people in the region are affected. And the overall situation is so dire that around a fifth of Tuvalu's population has already left to seek refuge on larger islands. These people may be the world's first climate change refugees, but Vlad predicts there will be many more.
From Pacific all the way to northern Alaska, many communities have already moved to new locations and others are preparing to relocate.
Relocating may be the only option for climate change refugees, but some have already found that adjusting to life in their adopted home could prove to be difficult.
The island nation of Kiribati, for example, is facing the threat of rising sea levels. The government bought some land in Fiji recently, where its residents will be relocated in the event sea levels rise to the point that it drowns this Pacific island nation. However, if they move to Fiji, Kiribati people will have no rights as the same as Fijian citizens. They won't be able to vote, they will always be seen as immigrants, and they are at high risk of losing their national identity.
It is easy to dismiss the consequences of rising sea levels, to believe that it's a problem limited to these small and distant island nations. But sea level projections show that in just under a century, 414 US cities will be facing the same problems as Tuvalu and Kiribati, to say nothing of the rest of the world.
Some climate scientists predict that by the end of the century, places like Miami, Amsterdam, Hamburg, or Lisbon could be affected by rising sea levels too. If this becomes a reality, it won't only impact these areas environmentally, but culturally and politically as well. The struggle for resources, land, food, and fresh water may cause local and global conflicts. It's clear that is the greatest issue that we will be facing soon.
And pretty much today we're going to talk to you about our island home of Tuvalu. First off, we're just going to give you an idea of where and what Tuvalu is. So Tuvalu is the 4th smallest country in the world. We've got a population of about 11,000 people. We're a very small country in terms of total area. We only have 26 square kilometers, which is very small, in that you could probably walk from one side of the island to the other in probably 45 minutes and see all of it in its entirety. So the word Tuvalu translates in English to 8 islands standing together, and that's pretty much how we approach climate change. We approach climate change standing together, and we continue to fight standing together. Research has shown that sea level rises in Tuvalu 1 to 2 millimeters every year. This is very alarming when our average elevation is not even 2 meters in Tuvalu, and the highest peak in Tuvalu is just 4 meters. When you take into consideration the storms, the high tides, king tides, floods and cyclones, we're struggling to stand together. We have 2 distinct seasons in Tuvalu, a dry season and a wet season. The wet season generally spans from November to April, and it is a time where we have to brace ourselves. Within the wet season are the expected king tides, the highest of high tides, and they've become way more frequent in Tuvalu, with tides reaching more inbound every single year. The average distance of king tide travels is about 3.2 meters, which sadly compromises about half of Tuvalu's land area. At these times, this is where those who live in small huts have to flee to find shelter in more durable homes. And our attempts at sea walls made from stones and oil drums have not been successful in keeping these tides out. I'm going to share a quick story that one that my father taught us. Back when he was in his 20s, he and his brothers, cousins, friends would take the canoe out to a small island called the Tuvalu, and they would go tuna trolling. He says it's one of the highlights of his life, and it was a great getaway from work, school, and in general life. Fast forward 9 years to 2001 when we returned to Tuvalu. The Tuvalu was no longer above water. It became submerged due to Cyclone Kelly in 1997. And that very place where my father bonded with his brothers and cousins was gone. He said they were no longer able to canoe over where the island once was. And that's just a illustration of how climate change has really affected Tuvalu. We have to have people relocate, and the possibility of relocation is scary just because our Tuvalu is our home, and it is our culture, and it is our identity. With climate change refugees especially, we've had some people relocate and have been identified as climate change refugees, especially relocating ourselves to New Zealand. We have actually been deemed as climate change refugees there. And we'd also like to acknowledge our brothers and sisters throughout the Pacific Islands that have also unfortunately undergone the same process. But despite the fact that we have had all of these, I guess, adverse impacts on our land and on our community and on our country, we still have this fighting spirit to keep pushing on and to keep moving on, to keep advocating climate justice. Yes, we are very small, and yes, we may be tiny in proportion to the rest of the world, but our voices are loud and proud. We are immersed with our culture every single day. It is so beautiful and so unique, and to see something so untouched such as our culture being impacted against and threatened against by the events of climate change, it gives us this passion to keep on fighting for our country and to keep being there, motivating our fellow Tuvaluans to be united at the forefront, to become climate change warriors, and to continue to fight the good fight against climate change.
We know that the numbers of people that will be forced to leave their homes and migrate to wherever around the world is going to increase. And so we need to be prepared to act on our call as Catholics and the Church to welcome those migrants who have nowhere else to go. And so we need to be prepared with the infrastructure and with that attitude and ability to welcome, so that we're not contributing to the already present conflict. So we really need to think about it in those two different ways to respond to all of the moving pieces in this situation.
So how can we, as Catholic and Christian brothers and sisters, respond to the needs of the poor and vulnerable subject to climate crisis? First, let us remember the greatest commandment, to love God with all of our heart, our soul, and our strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And this means welcoming the refugees who come to our country, to have an open heart, and to reflect our Christian commandments in our public policies by supporting public policies to mitigate our own carbon footprints, to support policies that welcome the migrant, that have us treat each other and them with love and compassion. And so we implore you to discern within your heart and mind what it is that you can do within your own life and amongst your friends and your neighbors to reach out and touch those who are poor and vulnerable.